in the military, where the line between life and death is as thin as a thread, stories of ghosts, spirits, and creatures beyond imagination are not uncommon. Right now, I want to take you on a journey through the dense fog of war, a place where death is not just the end, but also the beginning of something far more terrifying. What truly awaits a person when the last light fades from their eyes, when their final breath merges with the cold air of the battlefield? Have you ever wondered? Is death merely an eternal sleep, or is it a gateway to a world we dare not face? Death, a concept that makes the heart tremble, an abyss from which even the bravest turn away. But for the soldiers of the Great War, they had no choice but to stare it straight in the face. Amidst the trenches filled with mud and blood, death was not a distant stranger, but a cruel companion, always lurking in the shadows, ready to snatch any soul. The roar of bombs, the stench of blood mixed with damp earth, and screams choked by dust and smoke. That was the reality they lived in, where life was just a fragile glimmer of hope amidst an endless nightmare. But within that chaos, there were strange moments that made even me, a seasoned researcher, shudder. Unexplainable encounters, fleeting figures appearing and disappearing amidst the smoke of war. They recounted that in their darkest hours, they saw things not of this world, entities far beyond any definition of science or religion. "I swear I saw it," a soldier once whispered to his comrade in the flickering candlelight, his voice trembling. A tall, dark figure, faceless, standing right over Jimmy's body. It looked at me. I could feel it. Were these merely hallucinations of an exhausted mind, torn apart by months of fear and despair in the trenches? Or were they omens from the unseen realm, chilling warnings before the Grim Reaper's scythe swung down? I have read hundreds of letters, hasty scrawls on soaked paper, and I believe something larger, more terrifying, was hiding in the darkness of war. Do you dare to believe that the ghosts of fallen comrades still lingered on the battlefield, whispering curses amidst the wind, whistling through the charred wreckage of tanks? Or demons from hell, with glowing red eyes, silently stepping over corpses to hunt for the souls remaining in the rubble? "Don't go through that field," an old sergeant once warned his squad, his voice hoarse from smoke and fear. I hear laughter, not human laughter. These stories are not just tales, but deep cuts into the psyche, forcing us to ask, what is real and what is illusion in the fog of war? Imagine standing there, amidst the thick smoke, where visibility is only a few feet, and then a cold hand touches your shoulder. But when you turn around, there's nothing but darkness. This is the Fog War, a realm I have spent decades exploring. A kingdom where reality is distorted, where creatures from ancient legends step out to confront mankind. For ordinary people, death might just be a distant sorrow, a quiet funeral with suppressed sobs and white flowers. But for soldiers, it was a living entity, a colossal shadow always hovering around them, whispering promises of release or eternal damnation into their ears. Beneath their tattered boots, the ground was no longer earth, but a sticky, viscous mire, crimson with blood, emitting a stench of corpses that made stomachs churn. Bodies torn apart by shells were constantly unearthed and reburied, as if the war wanted to remind them that no one rested peacefully in this chaos. They stared into the lifeless eyes of death every day, seeing it reflected in the pale faces of comrades who had just fallen. Men who seconds before were talking about their families back home. He just smiled at me. A private once screamed in panic, then the bullet went through his head. But I swear he was still standing there, looking at me. Personal diaries, crumpled letters soaked in tears and blood, reveal a terrifying truth. Death was not just a physical end, but also a doorway to supernatural forces. There were nights when the moon was hidden by clouds, they heard heavy footsteps echoing from afar. Not the enemies, but something immense, ancient, and malevolent. And then, in rare accounts, there were instances where an unseen hand pulled them away from the Grim Reaper's scythe, as if fate itself was bent by an unnamed force. The first story I want to share comes from the memoir of a Canadian soldier, a man who survived that hell on earth in a way he himself could not explain. He wrote, "I saw it. A giant figure, taller than anyone I'd ever met, standing amidst the smoke, and it waved at me, as if wanting to lead me somewhere." That memoir was later discovered by historian Tim Cook, a man who dedicated his life to researching the mysteries of war, and he called it the most vivid evidence of the intersection between humans and the supernatural realm. Tim Cook once told me in an interview, "Ethan, if you didn't believe in ghosts before, these words will make you reconsider. They are not just stories, but warnings. In the cold trenches of the Great War, where blood soaked the earth and screams mingled with gunpowder smoke, there are stories that defy all logic. Testimonies from the beyond echoing between life and death." Will Byrd, a Canadian soldier with weary eyes and a hardened soul, never expected that one night, amidst exhaustion, he would encounter an entity that would turn his world upside down. "Get lost, you damned rats," Will growled, his voice hoarse, throwing a piece of rotten wood towards the rodents gnawing at his tattered boots. But they just squeaked, as if mocking his helplessness. Sleep, the luxury he craved, was always stolen by the whistle of artillery shells overhead, the annoying snores of his comrades, or the bone-chilling cold from the damp mud beneath his back. The hungry rats, with beady red eyes glinting in the darkness, not only stole rations, but also gnawed away at the last vestiges of hope in the minds of soldiers like Will. But that night, as his eyes grew heavy as lead, as exhaustion seemed to finally win, a strange sensation made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "What the hell now?" Will muttered, annoyed, as the sound of heavy, squelching footsteps in the mud echoed, heading straight towards him in the dark dugout. He thought it was a soldier coming to call him for guard duty, and irritation flared like fire. "Go away." "What do you want?" "It's not my turn yet, still got another hour." But when he looked up, in the flickering light of the oil lamp, the face bending over him wasn't a comrade's. It was Steve, his brother who had died over 2 years ago. A mysterious smile, both familiar and chilling, played on Steve's lips, as if he were peering into Will's very soul, pulling him into a living nightmare. Will's heart pounded. A cold chill ran down his spine, freezing him in place, because Steve, his beloved brother, had fallen in a bloody battle, his body buried somewhere beneath the soil of France. "No, you... how are you?" Will stammered, his voice trembling, tears welling up as he tried to find an explanation for this unbelievable presence. "Bro, I thought you were..." Before he could finish, Steve's hand swiftly clamped over his mouth, a hand strangely warm, as if life still resided within it. Steve's other hand raised, signaling silence, his eyes showing a deep sadness mixed with urgency, as if warning of something terrible about to happen. In that breathless, silent moment, Will clearly felt the warmth from Steve's hand. Not the cold of a corpse, but an unnatural vitality that defied all laws of nature. I believe it wasn't a hallucination. There are entities from other realms infiltrating the battlefield, exploiting the chaos to manifest. Steve looked deep into Will's eyes, his smile fleetingly sad but gentle. Then the familiar low voice spoke after 2 years of separation. "Get your gear and come with me." As if hypnotized by an unseen force, Will didn't question, didn't hesitate, hastily grabbed his gear, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and followed the back of his dead brother into the thick night. Steve's figure silently led the way through the mud-filled trenches, where the stench of corpses and gunpowder mingled, as if he knew a path unseen by anyone else. Will didn't know that, at that very moment, an artillery shell was aimed directly at the spot he had just left. Had he stayed, death would have consumed him in fire and black smoke. I've read in other soldiers' diaries. Ghosts, supernatural entities, sometimes appeared not to harm, but to pull them away from the Grim Reaper's scythe. But the question still haunts me. What was Steve really? A guardian spirit or something more sinister, borrowing his brother's form to lead Will towards a different fate? As they walked through the thick fog, Will heard faint whispers from afar. Not human voices, but the sound of something ancient, lurking in the darkness. "Bro, where are you taking me?" Will asked softly, his voice trembling. But Steve just turned back, gave that mysterious smile and kept walking, as if the answer lay ahead, in the limbo of war and the supernatural. The story of Will Byrd is one of those mysteries I can't stop thinking about. As Will stepped out of the damp dugout, he hurried after Steve, his departed brother, through the freezing night, where the winding trenches seemed like a labyrinth leading into the supernatural realm. Steve strode at a strange speed, his feet gliding over the mud without a sound, like a figure not of this world, leading Will into the deep darkness. A chilling unease gripped Will's chest, as if unseen eyes were watching from hidden corners, making him unable to stop himself from calling out, "Steve, where are we going? Answer me." But Steve remained silent, his vacant eyes fixed straight ahead, never looking back, his gait stiff as if controlled by some mysterious force. "Steve, what's happening? Are you real, or just—" Will yelled in desperation, but his words were swallowed by the thick fog. Only the whistling wind answered. They trudged through dark turns, the heavy stench of corpses and gunpowder rising, until Steve suddenly turned a blind corner, just a few short steps ahead of Will. Will's heart pounded. He dashed after him, rounding the corner. But before him lay only an empty, cold stretch of trench, as if Steve had never existed. "Steve! Steve!" Will shouted, his voice breaking in panic, echoing across the ruined battlefield, but no figure answered. He called his brother's name again. "Steve, where are you?" A desperate whisper lost in the night, like a plea sent to an unseen realm. Alone amidst the labyrinthine trenches, Will stood there, physically and mentally exhausted, facing a mystery far beyond his imagination, or that of anyone who had survived this hell. Entities like Steve could be spirits, but they could also be something more frightening. A creature borrowing the form of the dead to lure its prey. In that moment of solitude, the drowsiness Will had fought off now washed over him like an intense wave, enveloping him in a strange, almost surreal warmth. For the first time since setting foot on this brutal front, Will Byrd drifted easily into sleep, so peaceful that he wondered if he was still alive or had crossed the threshold of death. What the devil? "Morning, sunshine. Sleep well?" A teasing voice snapped Will out of his daze, and he opened his eyes to see a comrade grinning down at him. "Good grief, I must be going mad," Will muttered, his mind reeling with the images from the night before. Too real to be a dream, too absurd to be true. He tried to recall the memory. The warmth of Steve's hand on his mouth, the cold breath seeping through the fingers, and the sad yet mysterious eyes of his dead brother. "Did you see anyone come through here last night?" Will asked his comrade, his voice shaky, but the man just shrugged. "Just you and the rats, Byrd." Will's mind was in turmoil, unable to find an answer for the experience. Was it Steve's ghost, or just a hallucination born from prolonged exhaustion and fear? But I believe it wasn't a dream. The warmth from Steve's hand was a sign of a supernatural entity, perhaps a guardian spirit, or something toying with Will's fate. As Will sat there, faint morning light piercing the mist, he heard faint whispers from afar. Not his comrades, but something ancient, waiting in the darkness. Was what Will experienced the consequence of an exhausted mind, torn by constant shelling and fear, or vivid proof of another world intersecting with ours? Whatever it was, Will knew he couldn't dwell forever on unanswerable questions. A new day had dawned, and the war machine still roared, waiting for no one, even those who had just escaped the Grim Reaper's scythe. "All right, gotta go back," Will mumbled, trying to calm his racing heart, his trembling hand gripping his rifle as if clinging to reality. He navigated the winding paths of the trench, each heavy step feeling like dragging a nightmare behind him, heading towards his old dugout, the place he met Steve last night. But as he neared it, a bone-chilling cold rose within Will, as if his spirit sensed something horrific awaiting him. And then, his eyes widened in horror. The dugout that had been his shelter was now just a heap of rubble, torn apart by a bomb, leaving a deep, black crater in the battlefield. Body fragments were scattered everywhere. The stench of blood mingling with acrid gunpowder smoke assaulted his nostrils, and Will stood there, stunned, speechless by the massacre where no one survived. "No, it can't be," Will whispered, his voice fading in horror, as he realized that if he hadn't left the dugout last night, he would have been among those mangled corpses. A gruesome truth crept into his mind. Someone, or something, had intentionally led him away from imminent death. An unseen hand from the supernatural realm had altered his fate. "Get your gear and come with me." Steve's words echoed in Will's head, now taking on a chilling tone, like a life-saving prophecy from the realm of the dead. Spirits like Steve didn't just appear in dreams. Sometimes they were mysterious forces, intervening in the flow of life and death for reasons unknown. The image of Steve, his face blurred in the flickering lamplight, his eyes sad yet powerful, etched itself into Will's soul, becoming a ghost that haunted him for the rest of his life. Did he save me? Or was I tricked? Will wondered, his voice trembling as he stood amidst the wreckage, feeling as if someone was still watching from afar. Years later, his hair gray and the war just a memory, Will Byrd wrote down this story in his 1968 memoir, titled "Ghosts Have Warm Hands," a haunting and mysterious name. From my perspective, Will's experience wasn't unique. It's just one piece in the vast supernatural tapestry where the battlefield becomes an intersection between life and the unseen realm. Dozens of handwritten letters, military reports I've studied, all recount instances of soldiers encountering ghosts of fallen comrades or deceased relatives, appearing amidst gunpowder smoke and blood. "I saw him, sir," a soldier once recounted in panic. "Jack died last week, standing right next to me, pointing towards the hill, then vanished." For those soldiers, these encounters were both terrifying and strange, but often welcomed as a sign of protection, a glimmer of hope in the endless nightmare. But I wonder, were they truly the spirits of loved ones, or entities like skinwalkers, demons, or cryptids, borrowing familiar forms to manipulate, to lead them into a more horrifying game? As dusk fell over the battlefield, Will sometimes heard faint whispers from the bomb crater. Not human voices, but the sound of something ancient, waiting in the darkness. I am the one who has turned thousands of blood-soaked pages to understand the supernatural mysteries of the battlefield, where ghosts are not just memories, but embodiments of both hope and horror. For soldiers like Will Byrd, these encounters from the other side were seen as final farewells from comrades, a fragile thread connecting two worlds amidst smoke and corpses. Perhaps Steve was a guardian angel, a spirit still silently watching over Will from the unseen realm, leading him away from the Grim Reaper's scythe on that fateful night. Amidst the brutality of the Great War, where hope was strangled by bombs and the stench of blood, such stories were a faint light, a comforting balm for broken souls. For many devout soldiers, belief in the afterlife, in the existence of spirits, became a life raft in a sea of suffering, helping them carry on even when their legs trembled with exhaustion. "God help us," a soldier once whispered in the trench, clutching a cross tightly as the ghost of a comrade appeared in the mist, like a promise of salvation. But not all encounters were tinged with hope. There were other, darker stories, whispered in the night, spreading fear instead of comfort. Some figures didn't lead soldiers out of danger, but dragged them into the abyss, carrying deadly warnings or invitations from the cold depths of hell. "Damn it, out of ammo!" Alf, a British soldier, roared, his voice hoarse from gunpowder smoke, slamming his hand against his now useless rifle. "How much you got left, Alf?" his comrade asked, voice trembling, as his own rifle fire also fell silent amidst the battlefield's roar. "Not enough," Alf snapped back, eyes glued to the smoke ahead. "Hope you're good at praying, 'cause we're about done for. If Tommy doesn't make it back with the ammo, we're dead for sure," the other soldier hissed, desperation filling his words, hand tightening on his bayonet as if clinging to a final thread of hope. "Yeah, but that's a big if," Alf grumbled, loading his last round. "Just shoot if you've got anything left to shoot with." Throughout that morning, the thin British defensive line was relentlessly battered by German forces, the roar of bombs mingling with the screams of the falling. They had just captured this ruined town hours before, but the cost was rows of comrades' bodies lying amidst the rubble and black smoke. The remaining soldiers could only dig deeper into their positions, desperately trying to hold out against the fierce counterattack they knew would inevitably crash upon them like a deadly storm. Amidst the desolate ruins, Alf and his comrade fought tenaciously, pushing back the enemy even as their bodies were exhausted, their spirits worn down by relentless horror. And then, amidst the thick fog mixed with the dust of war, Alf and his comrade suddenly froze as a bizarre, chilling sight materialized before their eyes. "Wait. Hold on. Look," Alf shouted, his trembling hand pointing forward, where a blurry figure gradually became distinct in the milky white mist. "Good God Almighty! Where the devil did she come from?" his comrade exclaimed, voice cracking with fear. "Hey lady, get out of there! This is a death trap!" But the strange woman, as if stepping out of nowhere, didn't react. She stood there, motionless, her empty eyes staring straight at them, like a phantom from another realm. I've heard similar stories. Entities like this could be lost souls, or worse, something masquerading as human, carrying a curse amidst the blood-soaked battlefield. The story of this woman in blue is one of those mysteries that never fails to send a shiver down my spine. She stood there, motionless as a statue amidst the furious storm of bullets, as if time and space had stopped flowing around her, drawing all eyes into the void. Her empty eyes locked onto Alf and his comrade, cold and unfeeling, as if seeing straight through their souls, making the hairs on their necks prickle. Her bright blue dress and the bonnet on her head stood out bizarrely, almost spectrally, against the gray backdrop of the ruined town, where only blood and dust reigned. Her face was deeply lined with hardship, her sunken eyes reflecting extreme weariness, yet hidden within was a terrifying stillness, as if she had watched worlds collapse without blinking. Stranger still, the gunfire from the German side suddenly ceased, as if the entire enemy line was also captivated by this unusual presence, a deathly silence amidst the chaos. "Hey," Alf whispered, his voice shaky, not daring to look away from her. "Does she even know there's a war on? Or is she some kind of ghost?" "Who knows?" his comrade replied, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard. maybe severe shell shock. Poor thing. But we gotta get her out of there. All right, but how? Alf glanced towards the German lines, heart pounding. She's standing right in the killing zone. I'll get Tommy, the other decided, shouting over the whistling wind. Tommy, get over here quick. Something weird's going on. Tommy, a young soldier, hurried over, wiping sweat from his brow, panting. Sorry, just took out a machine gun nest. What's all the fuss? You speak French? Alf asked urgently, pointing forward. There's an old woman stuck between the lines out there. A little? Tommy frowned, skeptical. Why do we need French here? Just look! Alf's comrade snapped, and as Tommy's eyes fell on the woman hazy in the smoke and dust, his face suddenly changed, turning deathly pale. Oh, no, Tommy whispered, his eyes wide with horror, his body beginning to tremble. Like a sleepwalker, Tommy slowly stood up and stepped out from cover, ignoring Alf's panicked shout. Tommy, get back here. Are you crazy? But Tommy didn't hear, his gaze fixed on the woman in blue, her cold eyes following his every step across the deadly no man's land. I, Ethan, have studied cases like this. Psychopomp entities, guides of souls, often appear to ferry spirits to the afterlife, but sometimes they have darker intentions. Tommy, as if mesmerized, slowly removed his helmet, revealing tangled hair, and uttered final words that left both Alf and his comrade speechless. That's my mother. I think she's come for me. At that exact moment, a deafening explosion ripped through the air, an artillery shell landing right where Tommy stood, smoke and debris erupting, obscuring everything in horrific chaos. When the smoke cleared, Alf and his comrades stared in shock at Tommy's remaining fragments. Death had come swiftly, but couldn't erase the haunting impact of his final words. But the woman in blue had vanished, as if swallowed by the mist, leaving no trace, like a phantom who had never existed on the blood-soaked battlefield. Where did she go? Alf mumbled, his voice trailing off, gripping his rifle as if to hold on to some sanity amidst this surreal nightmare. The two remaining soldiers stood there, minds reeling with the chilling question. Was Tommy truly taken by that woman? Or was it something in disguise, pulling him into the abyss? I believe this wasn't just the mother's spirit. It could have been an entity like a skinwalker or demon, borrowing a familiar form to manipulate, to spread terror amidst the fire and smoke. In my research, I've noticed soldiers from all eras have a deep connection to superstition and the supernatural, especially during war, where life and death are separated by a single breath. The soldiers of the Great War, largely farmhands, laborers, miners, people raised on folklore, always carried within them a fear and belief in unseen forces. As darkness fell on the ruined town, Alf sometimes heard faint whispers from the bomb crater. Not human voices, but the sound of something ancient lurking in the fog. I've observed that during World War I, the belief in an unseen force governing fate was deeply ingrained in the minds of the soldiers. When fate sent an omen, whether a glimmer of hope or the shadow of death, they couldn't ignore it, because war had taught them that every sign held life or death significance. A lucky charm, an old necklace, a crumpled letter from home, or a torn piece of cloth from a mother's dress became a talisman, a fragile ray of hope amidst the smoke and blood. For the soldiers, these items weren't just keepsakes, but sources of psychological strength, things that helped them gather the courage to go over the top, to face the nightmare ahead. Losing a lucky charm before a major battle was akin to hearing death knock at the door. They believed it was a death sentence, an unavoidable omen. If I drop this, I'm done for, a young soldier once whispered to his comrade, hand tightly gripping a silver ring, eyes darting around as if death lurked nearby. But sometimes, fate needed no intermediary. It found them directly, whispering chilling warnings of impending death straight into their ears. The handwritten letters, the diaries soaked in sweat and blood that I've studied, all recount. Many soldiers had premonitions of their own deaths, just hours, sometimes minutes, before they happened. These soldiers, though typically brave and tough, would suddenly be enveloped by a vague dread, an unspoken unease, as if an invisible hand was squeezing their hearts. "I don't feel right," a sergeant once mumbled to his comrade, voice trembling, like someone standing right behind me, waiting for something. It wasn't just stress. It could have been heightened psychic sensitivity exploding under extreme conditions, or a genuine precognitive ability pulling them into the intersection of life and death. In those moments, they seemed detached from reality, their gazes distant, lost in deep contemplation, as if they had already seen their own shadows beneath the gravestone. And then, a strange calm often washed over them, as if they had accepted their inevitable fate. A surrender to the whispers from the unseen realm. Most terrifyingly, these premonitions were often tragically accurate. Death arrived just as they predicted, leaving a chilling haunt for the survivors. "All right, just another 10 yards or so," the captain's voice echoed in the stuffy, damp tunnel. "Then we'll, take a short break." "Yes, sir," Corporal Albert Davy replied, his panting echoing from ahead, mingling with the sound of picks and shovels biting into the dark earth. As a member of Australia's renowned #1 tunneling company, Albert was no stranger to the specter of death. It always lurked in the dark tunnels where he lived and worked. Sappers like him were trained for the most horrific tasks, digging deep underground, where the sounds of bombs overhead echoed down like the roars of demons. They navigated through no man's land in narrow, suffocating tunnels, where the air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and death waited behind every swing of the pickaxe. Their objective was to place massive explosive charges beneath enemy trenches, a daring effort to rip apart the opposing defensive line with deadly fire and black smoke. "If this thing goes off wrong, we're all goners," Albert once joked dryly with a comrade, but his eyes betrayed fear, not just of the explosives, but of something watching them in the dark. I've read the diaries of sappers like Albert. They faced not only the enemy above ground, but also supernatural entities hidden deep beneath the earth, biding their time. I have spent my life tracing the ghosts and whispers from the unseen realm on the battlefield. And the story of Corporal Albert Davy is a mystery I cannot forget. Working in suffocating tunnels, deep beneath unstable ground, where every swing of the pick could be death's call, demanded a special kind of soldier. Brave, cold-blooded, and seemingly fearless. Corporal Albert Davy was just such a man. A steel warrior with an iron will, always maintaining his spirit even as death stalked every second in the damp darkness of the tunnels. By October 1918, after 2 years surviving the hell underground, Davy had become a legend within Australia's #1 tunneling company, with a string of successful missions that terrified the enemy. Though his work was so dangerous the mere thought could make one tremble, Davy remained bright, steadfast, a pillar of morale for his comrades and a source of pride for his commanders. "If I die down here, at least I'll take a few Germans with me." He once laughed heartily with comrades, but sometimes his eyes held a flicker of sadness, as if sensing something in the darkness. But as the Great War entered its final days, as the light of peace began to dawn, the role of tunnelers like Davy gradually faded, replaced by new tactics. The Allied 100 Days Offensive had broken the 4-year stalemate, rendering explosive tunnels obsolete, giving way to lightning-fast advances across the battlefield. Now, the numbered one. Tunneling Company was no longer hidden underground, but fighting alongside the infantry, facing the enemy with rifles and bayonets amidst the towering smoke and flames. Though fierce battles still lay ahead, Allied victory was almost within grasp, and whispers of an armistice spread like a wind of hope. Soldiers began to dream of returning home. The laughter of children, the smell of baking from mother's kitchen, and a life without the sound of bombs. A rare joy amidst the nightmare. But it was precisely during those hopeful weeks that Corporal Davy suddenly changed. He became gloomy, withdrawn, his gaze distant as if drawn into a world no one else could reach. From the cheerful man he was, he now spoke little, his lips pressed tight, as if hearing a call from the unseen realm that his comrades couldn't perceive. "What's wrong, Davy?" A close friend pressed, clapping his shoulder, but he just shook his head, his voice low and hoarse. "I don't know, but I feel it, like something's coming." Davy couldn't explain the dark cloud enveloping his mind, an intense, chilling feeling, like death's hand had rested on his shoulder and wouldn't let go. I have studied hundreds of cases like this. Premonitions of death aren't just hallucinations, but could be warnings from a supernatural entity lurking amidst the war. Like so many other soldiers, Davy knew with certainty that his time had come, an irresistible omen, like a black curtain about to fall on his life. According to the records of Captain Oliver Holmes Woodward, Davy's commander, a haunting conversation took place just before a major battle, leaving a chilling imprint on his mind. At this time, the tunneling unit was tasked alongside the infantry with building a bridge across the Somme Canal, clearing the way for tanks to advance, amidst heavy gunfire and thick dust. Amidst the assembling forces, Davy unexpectedly sought out Captain Woodward, his steps heavy, his face pale as if he had already seen his own grave. "Sir, I need to tell you something," Davy whispered, his voice trembling, looking directly at Woodward as if wanting to etch every word before it was too late. I believe that moment wasn't just a confession. It was a sign that an unseen force had chosen Davy, pulling him into the intersection of life and death. The story of Corporal Albert Davy is one of those cases that chills me every time I recall it. Captain Woodward wrote in his memoirs, "I had witnessed many soldiers have premonitions of disaster, but Davy's case is something I will never forget. It happened right before my eyes, as clear as daylight." Corporal Davy, one of Woodward's best soldiers, approached with a deathly pale face, whispering, "Captain, if I don't make it through this one, could you hold on to my things and send them to my wife?" Woodward was stunned, snapping back, "Don't be absurd, Davy. We all live with danger. Keep calm. Don't let those foolish thoughts shake you." But Davy looked him straight in the eye, his gaze steady and cold as steel, his voice low and even. "Sir, nothing you say can change it. I know for certain I will die in this battle." "Please help me, sir," Davy pleaded, his voice trembling but resolute, "just to set my mind at ease before I go." Woodward felt a chill run down his spine, and though reluctant, he wrote. To ease his mind, I agreed to take his personal effects, a silver ring and a crumpled letter from home. He stood silently, watching Davy's figure disappear into the throng of soldiers, merging into the sea of uniforms under the faint dawn light, as if his spirit had already departed before his body fell. The next morning, before sunrise, even before the H hour for the attack, a stray artillery shell took Davy's life. Swift, brutal, exactly as his dark prophecy foretold. Woodward, upon hearing the news, stood frozen on the battlefield, his mind reeling with the haunting thought. He knew all along. He wrote of Davy. He was calmer, braver than anyone I'd ever met. Never flinched, always inspired his comrades. A true soldier. There was no sign of fear or panic, Woodward affirmed. Only a strange certainty, as if he had seen death waiting for him. For me, this case stands out because it comes from a rational officer like Woodward, someone not easily given to superstition, yet unable to deny what he witnessed. More than a century after the Great War ended, the eerie stories from the trenches still echo, captivating and haunting us, like whispers from the unseen realm that never fade. Years later, when interviewed, elderly veterans, now gray-haired and seasoned by experience, never retracted their accounts of the supernatural phenomena they had faced. Young or old, these soldiers were perfectly honed war machines, their minds and senses sharpened to an almost superhuman degree to survive hell on Earth. I saw him, clear as day, an old soldier once recounted, his voice hoarse. "Bill died last month, standing right in front of me in the fog, pointing towards the hill. They had learned to observe the smallest details, react to every sign. So how to explain when they themselves saw ghosts of fallen comrades in the darkness? How to explain the prophetic visions that tormented them at night, like chilling warnings of unavoidable death, as Davy experienced? It wasn't just hallucination. It could be demons, spirits, or cryptids, entities infiltrating the war, manifesting to guide or to hunt. That generation of extraordinary soldiers has passed on, leaving behind precious yet mysterious testimonies, like a door cracked open into a world far beyond our understanding. From the front lines, where they faced not only physical death, but also glimpsed figures from beyond the veil between life and death, they left an unanswered question. As night fell on the battlefield, Woodward sometimes heard whispers from afar. Not human voices, but the sound of something ancient, waiting in the darkness.